Okay, y'all, what went down in that courtroom, nobody, and I mean nobody, was ready for it. The air was already thick with tension, but once the prosecution stepped forward clutching that little flash drive like it held a bomb, you could practically hear the building inhale. Whispers stopped, heads turned, phones were put down. Everyone knew something big was about to blow, but they couldn't have imagined just how big. The prosecutor, eyes locked on the jury, raised her voice. Your Honor, the prosecution requests permission to present newly obtained audio evidence recovered during the federal raid of Mr. Combs' Miami property. Boom. But when the judge leaned forward and asked where it came from, her answer made jaws drop. Encrypted recordings from an off-grid backup. This specific file is a private phone call between the defendant and Bishop T.D. Jakes, dated August 9th, 2022. The gasp that swept through the courtroom wasn't just dramatic, it was devastating. T.D. Jakes, the same T.D. Jakes who stood beside presidents and preached to millions? With the judge's nod, the lights dimmed, the audio loaded, and when the voices kicked in, no one could breathe. Diddy sounded panicked. Things are heating up. I need your covering. They're sniffing around LA. T.D. Jakes, calm, calculated. And T.D. Jakes, he coached him like a general laying out war plans masked in scripture. If the victims speak, he said, remind them who they're up against. Not everyone gets to rise. Some disappear. That's balance. Silence. Choked gasps. A woman broke down crying. A juror leaned in, shaking her head. This wasn't just shocking, it was soul-shattering. The very man whose sermons once inspired hope was now weaponizing silence. Manipulation masked as faith. The lights flicked back on, but the courtroom didn't move. Diddy sat there like a statue, his lawyers frozen. The prosecutor, cold and calm, stepped forward again. What you just heard, she said, is not merely collaboration. It's spiritual manipulation. A religious leader using scripture to help cover up abuse, intimidation, and betrayal. And then she dropped the quote like a hammer. The weak ones always fold. Those weak ones, victims, survivors, people who were silenced. She didn't need to yell. Her voice cracked with betrayal. This isn't just a scandal. This is a betrayal of faith, the judge whispered. We'll adjourn for a short recess, but nobody moved. How could they? Faith itself had just been dragged into the witness stand, and it wasn't looking holy. After that soul-snatching audio rocked the courtroom, the vibe was different. Gone was the tension of legal drama. What remained? Pure devastation. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a spiritual exorcism happening live. When court resumed, so the prosecutor wasn't done. Not even close. She stepped back into the center like a woman holding lightning in her hands. This time, it wasn't a flash drive. It was a printed, time-stamped transcript of that call between Diddy and Bishop T.D. Jakes, stamped with a federal watermark. She held it like a holy text defiled. But that wasn't all. Your Honor, she began, we also request the court's attention for the next exhibit, a memo from Diddy's own legal consultant, written 2 days after the call with Bishop Jakes. It references a spiritual firewall and a divine handler. Pause for effect. Gulp. The judge gave a silent nod. The screen lit up. Subject line, crisis protocol, spiritual firewall strategy. Author, redacted legal strategist from Combs Enterprises. Recipient, executive risk team. The memo was drenched in sanctified spin. It recommended filtering all public responses through spiritual intermediaries. T.D. Jakes was referred to as J, the one responsible for theological framing, messaging themes, forgiveness, redemption, persecution. In other words, gaslight the faithful. Wrap this scandal in scripture and feed it to the public as divine adversity. The room gasped. Again, the prosecutor's voice pierced the tension. Let's break this down. This wasn't a PR strategy. This was weaponized worship. Scripture, used not to heal, but to hide. Objection, the defense tried. Weak, the prosecutor fired back with surgical precision. We are not claiming authorship, we are demonstrating influence. The same phrases in the call appear in this memo. Spiritual firewall, alignment, divine handling. This was a coordinated playbook. The judge nodded. Sustained for clarity of influence? But baby, the show wasn't over. Next slide. A notebook seized during the raid. Handwritten scribbles by a personal assistant in blue ink. Called Jake. Circles nervous. Get a word on containment and loyalty. Use scripture. Boom! That was the final nail. The gasps this time, they weren't shock. They were grief because the picture was forming and it was terrifying. Even Jennifer Lopez, sitting in the gallery, lips pressed together like a sealed envelope of pain, was watching watching this unfold with a look of grim realization. She'd already testified about her time in Diddy's world, but now it was clear this went deeper than any of them had known. The prosecutor turned toward the jury, slow and steady. You've heard the call. You've read the memo. You've seen the notes. This wasn't just criminal behavior. It was theological cover. The voice telling victims to stay silent. It wasn't just Diddy. It was their pastors, their bishop, their supposed shepherd. In the silence that followed, Diddy leaned to his lawyer, whispered something. The man scribbled, flipped folders, panic setting in, because now even Diddy could feel it. His shield was on fire. And Bishop T.D. Jakes? He wasn't just involved, he was now center stage in the spiritual takedown of the century. By now, the courtroom wasn't just in shock, it was mourning. But the prosecution wasn't letting up. No, baby, she had one more card to play, and it was brutal. She stepped up, holding a stack of papers so thick you'd think it was a novel. But this wasn't fiction. This was the real, gut-wrenching roadmap to how faith was twisted into a fort. Your Honor, she said, we're now submitting a cross-record between the transcript of the leaked call and Bishop T.D. Jakes' own publicly available sermons over the last 5 years. And just like that, the room gasped again. The screen lit up. 2 columns side by side. Column A, lines from the leaked phone call, August 2022. Column B, sermons and interviews from 20172-022. It was chilling. A, not everyone deserves the full story. B, sometimes your silence is your strongest sermon. Speak only what serves the kingdom. A, stay aligned, keep the circle tight. B, those who are assigned to your life will question your silence. They'll protect it. A, use faith to settle fear. B, faithfulness includes knowing when to stay quiet. The courtroom exhaled, not in relief, but horror. These weren't just vague overlaps. These were coded messages dressed as sermons. And now the code had been cracked. Let's be clear, the prosecutor said. We're not here to criminalize faith. We're here to show how it was used, not as a bomb, but as a muzzle. These weren't words of encouragement. These were instructions. They taught people to protect Diddy under the banner of righteousness. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, she hit them with a message submitted anonymously. A former member of Bishop Jakes' ministry staff had receipts. From October 2022, Stafferman says you're covered. He'll remind the faithful who you really are. Sunday's message will do the work. Diddy, tell him I appreciate the firewall. We good? No gasps now, just silent devastation. People didn't just believe in these men. They built their lives around their words. And those words, scripted like damage control. The prosecutor looked heartbroken but steady. This was not spiritual encouragement. This was narrative control, emotional conditioning, a pulpit turned PR machine. The judge whispered, this material will be reviewed as influencing the obstruction charge. But everyone knew what just happened. The prosecution didn't just link T.D. Jakes to Diddy. She ripped the mask off a system built to bless abuse while preaching redemption. And the silence in that courtroom? It wasn't just legal, it was spiritual. And then came the dagger. I stayed too long. I believed too blindly. But the truth is louder now than my fear. Redemption without accountability is just a rebrand. I know what I did, and now I choose to protect the truth. The letter ended. The prosecutor said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Not a soul moved. Not a single reporter typed. No one blinked. Because that wasn't just a statement. It was a confession soaked in spiritual blood. The prosecutor finally spoke. This letter is not one person's shame. It is the echo of so many people's pain. It confirms that the pulpit wasn't just silent. It was strategic. It was complicit. She folded the letter slowly, reverently, like a flag draped over a fallen truth. We're not here to draw faith. We're here to confront what happens when faith is used to protect a predator and when the shepherd becomes the architect of silence. She turned toward the jury. Every day of this trial has peeled back another layer of illusion. Today, we reached the core. Diddy didn't do this alone. He had architects. And T.D. Jakes? He was the chief engineer. The judge, visibly shaken, whispered, "Court will recess before final statements." But nobody stood. Nobody exhaled. Because that letter, unsigned, faceless, nameless, hit harder than any testimony so far because it came from within. The final day didn't start with cameras. No chaos outside, no protesters, no chants, just a storm that had passed, leaving behind the wreckage Inside, the courtroom felt different, like a sacred space turned graveyard. Everyone walked in slower, heads bowed, because this wasn't just about Diddy anymore. It wasn't even just about crime. It was about trust. It was about faith. And it had been shattered. The judge entered. His robe looked heavier, not in cloth, but in burden. Because what he was about to preside over wasn't just a legal proceeding, was a reckoning. The prosecutor stood one last time. No papers, no props, just her and the truth. Your Honor, members of the jury, today marks the end of a trial unlike anything we've seen in recent memory. We came here to determine if Sean Combs committed crimes, and we discovered something far more dangerous. She paused. Her voice didn't rise. It broke just a little. We discovered an empire built on silence, but not just any silence. Strategic, blessed silence. Scripted, packaged, delivered with a smile and a scripture. She turned and faced the room. And the saddest part of all, that silence wasn't held up by bodyguards or billionaires. It was held up by a preacher. She turned back to the jury. T.D. Jakes isn't on trial here. Not officially, but you've heard his voice. Not once, but over and over. Not in prayer, but in plans. She held up the transcript of his voicemail, the one that sealed it all. Redemption that can be orchestrated. His language became the spiritual buffer that protected a predator. Then she looked right at Diddy. He didn't fall because people hated him. He fell because people saw him. Because the curtain dropped. And behind the lights and the parties and the brands was a man hiding behind a microphone. And behind that man, a bishop holding the cord. Silence. You could hear people weeping. Quiet, tired weeping. Not theatrical, just real. The sound of betrayal finally processed. The judge whispered, "Do you rest your case?" The prosecutor nodded, steady and soft. "We rest." And that was it. No applause, no slamming of folders, no gasps. Just stillness, because no one had just watched a trial. They had watched a system collapse. A carefully orchestrated empire of influence, power, and fake redemption crumble right there in front of them. Diddy didn't move. His face was hollow. The courtroom no longer feared him. They pitied him. A king dethroned, not by enemies, but by truth. And in churches across the country, living rooms once filled with T.D. Jakes' sermons now echoed with silence, not confusion, not rage, clarity. Because when scripture is used as a smokescreen and power hides behind prayer, even the faithful must ask, who's preaching? And who are they really protecting? As people filed out of the courtroom, they weren't just leaving a legal space. They were walking out of the ruins of a legacy, one where the voice that told them to kneel was the same voice whispering in the dark to keep victims quiet. And this time, the pulpit had no defense.